Hello and welcome to the African Hub for Sustainable Creative Economies Knowledge Hub Nairobi. My name is Dr. Lauren England and I'm one of the UK researchers based at King's College London who's been working with the AHSCE Nairobi Fashion Hub, which is based at the University of Nairobi. And I'm here today with Phoebe Ouma, who's an illustrator and entrepreneur in the field of fashion. And Phoebe's going to be sharing her experience as a fashion entrepreneur with us. So firstly, thank you, Phoebe, for your time today. And it's really great to have you joining us on the Knowledge Hub. Could you start us off by telling us about how you came to be a professional illustrator and also some of the professional lessons that you've learned along the way?
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Lauren. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I'm really happy that you guys decided to include me in your study. So I'll just go back to when I started sharing my work online, which was in 2018. It was just after an internship that I had done. It was part of the school curriculum, and we're supposed to do one internship just the year before graduation. We weren't going back to school immediately, and I had about 3 months left before I would rejoin university. And I had been doing a bit of illustration at the internship, but I just felt it hadn't been utilized to the maximum potential that it could. And I decided to continue that on my own. Around that time, I began sharing my illustrations on Instagram. And I wanted to focus on sharing mainly African brands and just focusing my work on African designers because I felt that was underrepresented in the market. I continued to do that for a couple of months for the time that I had some free time during that holiday. And people began to really like the work. Some of the designers would repost it, and I was just really excited about that. In 2019, when I was now going to my 4th year of university, I put the illustration on the back burner for a little bit, and I wasn't able to continue as much. But apparently the work that I had put out was good enough for some people who felt that they could hire me. So I got 2 inquiries, and that was very exciting. So as I shared these 2 experiences, I feel like this is where my first professional lesson came from. One of the businesses was a spa, and she had wanted to include illustrations in her business. And the other one was a jewelry brand. The mistake that I made, being very new to the subject of illustration, since I wasn't really a professional, I was just merely sharing my work. I took on both of the briefs that I had been given and basically started working on them without taking a deposit or being paid. Fortunately for the spa one, I was paid, and unfortunately for the jewelry one, I wasn't paid. And they ended up using my work on their social media, which was a huge lesson for me. I took a step back because I found it was a little bit difficult to balance the two, the illustration and the final projects that are usually involved in fashion school. There's a lot of sewing, there's a collection you have to put together, and after not getting paid by the jewelry brand, that kind of really stressed me out. And I just wanted to re-strategize and go about things in a different way. So after I had finished my final semester in university, I think it was about after the first quarter of the year in 2019, I started going back to the illustration once again, sharing it on social media, putting out a bit more refined work than I had been doing before, really utilizing the digital tools that I had learned. At that point, I had basically now learned that I should have some contract in place when, approaching a client in this way, because just someone giving you their word isn't good enough sometimes when it comes to business. And that was a really big lesson that I had learned. I went on to illustrate a series about Kenya and just some of my personal experiences. It did really well, and without my knowledge, or without me knowing at the time, there was actually a producer who worked at CNN who had been following my work, and she was interested in this African angle that I was putting out there. She sent me an email, which honestly was one of the most flattering things. It really took me back because I couldn't even believe it. I didn't even believe people were actually paying attention or they actually cared that much. And in my mind, I didn't really see myself as an established artist. So I was grappling with the reality of having this opportunity be brought to me and wondering if I really deserved it. We spoke on email, and initially they wanted to do a TV feature, but that fell through and that didn't happen. But they ended up giving me a post on their CNN Africa page on Instagram and an article that followed on their website, which was still really beneficial to my business because they shared it on Twitter, and the page started getting quite a bit of traffic from the Instagram post, the article, and the Twitter share. So around that point, I'm still grappling with this reality of becoming an illustrator because I hadn't entirely decided I'm going to be an illustrator. I haven't even graduated. Graduation was going to be later on that year in November, and all of these things are happening around September, October. So I started getting so many inquiries. I hadn't even figured out the type of work that I wanted to do, which brings me to my second lesson of basically nailing down the type of work that you really want to do. I think that's important, knowing the scope, because it's good for an illustrator to be diverse in the type of work that they take. But I feel that if you're not really concrete about your own vision, then you fit into so many boxes that people want to put you in, and you're not really viewed like as a specialist in your field. And I feel like that can lead to not so well-paying jobs. So at the time, I was just happy to be working, and I remember getting so much traffic on the page and messages from people who wanted me to draw different things. I hadn't figured out the balance of really nailing down what the prices should even be. So anything that I was being offered, I was just happy to take it. And the jobs came in so quickly in a short period of time that I ended up getting burnt out so quickly. And it was surprising to me because I didn't imagine that something I loved doing from the time I was a child, drawing and sharing my art with people, would lead to burnout. But that also now brings me to my third lesson, which is just because you love doing something doesn't mean you don't need to find a balance in what you do. So for me, that was just a point of creating timelines, creating boundaries. And so now I knew I had to have a contract in place. I had to know the type of work that I wanted to do. What kind of representation did I want to put out into the world? So I would attract those types of jobs. And the third thing was just finding the work-life balance between every single thing that was happening to me at the time of my newfound career as an illustrator. So that's basically the short story of how I got into illustration.
Amazing. Thank you, Phoebe, for sharing such a sort of, quite a whirlwind story, particularly going through, your whilst also studying and figuring out your own pathway as an illustrator, and some really valuable lessons there, I think, for any aspiring creative illustrator designer in this space. So thank you for that. You've highlighted quite a few quite exciting sort of achievements that you've had, or kind of profiles that you've had created, and people that you've met along the way. What would you say has been the most rewarding aspects of your career so far?
I feel like the most rewarding part has been the people that I get to meet. I think illustration opened me up to a world I didn't even know truly existed before I joined illustration. It's always so interesting to hear people's visions and what they have planned. And the thing about illustration is, no matter what time that it's happening, whether it's in a pandemic, which I was very fearful of, that the jobs would dry up, people wouldn't really be investing in creative spaces or anything like that. But people were still looking for ways to tell their stories, whether it was on their packaging, their fabrics, whatever it was. It really gave me hope that human beings are always hoping for more. They're always being creative. And I think that's the best part, to just see the human side of people and to see how creative they can be, no matter how difficult things get.
That's brilliant. Yeah, I think it's lovely to see. Also, you mentioned in your story, you know, you've had some negative experiences, but overwhelmingly that, you know, your the people that you've met have been a positive influence, and that you're excited by what you see around you. Given that, that people are such a kind of, you know, a huge part for you, both in terms of other creatives you're inspired by or the people that you work with. How would you say that you go about practicing networking? You know, who are you interacting with, and, you know, where is this taking place for you?
So when it comes to networking, for me, I'm an introvert by nature, so that was always a difficult side of me to kind of grapple with, but I knew it was necessary because I feel like networks are so important. It's the difference between someone mentioning your name in a certain room for you to probably be proposed for that job. So the way that I go about networking is through my social media. And I learned this early on when I was tagging the different designers, sharing my work, that if you do share things in a very genuine way, it's not necessarily viewing people as opportunities, but just trying to connect with people genuinely, you do find that it goes a long way. And I think my biggest networks have been formed online and through social media, from some of the journalists that I've met, other creatives, and work opportunities that I've found. So I think it's very important to, use the online spaces that we have, because you get to meet people I don't think you'd be able to meet in your day-to-day life.
Absolutely. I love the idea of social media being the introvert's ideal networking platform as well, that you don't have to go out anywhere. But you can still meet people. I think there's real value in that. Yeah, you mentioned those three lessons for creatives, you know, having that structure, knowing who you are as a creative, and having that all important work-life balance. You mentioned, you know, that structure, you know, becoming a professional in the way that you conduct your business being really important. Like, is that the main kind of like professional advice you would give to entrepreneurs who are looking to get started in this field?
I think that is the main advice that I would give people, because sometimes when you're dealing with a business that's more traditional, that's been around longer, when they come across probably creatives and it feels like you don't really know what you're doing, I feel like it's so easy for you to be taken advantage of. And that's why it's so important for you to come in knowing yourself, knowing your boundaries, what you'd like. And I feel like that just helps to move the ball even faster for you. And when a business, another business that's been around longer, that's probably in a traditional field, and probably this is their first time working with a creative, and they feel like you can kind of speak their corporate language, I feel like it's so easier for the two of you to meet and for you to be compensated in the right way, because they see this as a profession just like any other. And that's what I encourage anyone to do. As much as you're having fun with your career, and the creative part of it is to still employ as much structure as possible. So it's even easier for you to follow an order, to file your taxes, whatever the necessary other formal parts are that sometimes aren't as fun to do.
I think that's great advice, so particularly that sort of how you share that common language with maybe more traditional businesses, so that they can understand you and you can understand how to work effectively together. I wanted to ask, you know, what is coming up next for you? Can I ask what you're working on?
But right now, I've been working on some maps that I've been drawing for the last year and a half or so. I started working on maps in late 2021. And then I've shared my first map in 2022, which was a map of Nairobi. I had just become so enthralled by cartography after watching this Disney movie, and there's this one character who had this map. And I don't know, I just went down this rabbit hole of finding more about maps, and I felt like African maps once again were underrepresented in terms of like the illustration part of it. The maps that I could find were the older ones, which I did like that aesthetic. So I was combining that vintage type of feel with some modern type of illustration, and it did really well when I shared my Nairobi map. So right now, I decided to do a map for all of the counties in Kenya and just teach more people about that. Hopefully I can put it into a book and release that sometime later on this year. So that's really exciting for me.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I think it's been really valuable, like of the lessons that you've learning from your professional experience with the highs and the lows. So thank you so much for sharing those with us, Phoebe, and for sharing your experience with us. We hope that it will be a useful learning for other creatives who are coming to find out about your work through the AHSC Knowledge Hub.
Thank you for having me.